case is the single most cold, calculated, premeditated case of murder that I have ever seen.
On July 28, 1999, a 12-year-old boy ended the life of Tiffany Unick while trying to copy wrestling moves he had seen on TV. Tate, who was about 170 pounds, was left alone with Tiffany, who weighed only 48 pounds, while his mother was asleep upstairs. He claimed it was an accident, but the injuries were so severe that experts compared them to falling from a 3-story building. A child abuse specialist estimated that the beating lasted about 5 minutes. Tate had a history of bad behavior, including fighting, lying, stealings, and getting suspended from school 15 times. Even though prosecutors offered a deal of 3 years in prison and 10 years of probation, his mother refused it. He was then tried as an adult for first-degree murder, found guilty, and sentenced to life in prison without parole, making him the youngest person in modern U.S. history to get that sentence.
The statute said simply, the conviction for murder in the first degree is a mandatory life sentence. I had no options but to follow the law and sentence Lionel Tate to.
Some people, including the jury, believed the sentence was too harsh. They thought that giving him life in prison wouldn't help him or bring justice to the victim.
In jail for the rest of his life is not helping him. It's not helping society. It's certainly not helping, Tiffany Unick.
Even the prosecutor admitted the sentence was too harsh, saying he didn't think life without parole was the right punishment.
I realized that Tiffany Unick had justice, but I made no secret by the fact that I found life in prison with no parole inappropriate as a sentence.
In 2004, an appeals court overturned his conviction because he hadn't had a mental competency hearing before trial. After that, he took a plea deal, was released after 3 years in prison, and served 1 year of house arrest plus 10 years of probation. However, he repeatedly broke his probation. In 2004, he was caught outside his home with a knife. In 2005, he was arrested for armed robbery after threatening a pizza delivery man with a firearm, which also violated his parole. In 2006, he was sentenced to 30 years for having a weapon. In 2008, he accepted a 10-year sentence for the robbery, which he is serving at the same time as the 30-year sentence. Justin Jarman was a member of the Detroit Taking Over gang in Cleveland and was convicted for a drive-by attack on October 4, 2016 that injured 2 innocent children. 17-year-old Jarman, along with Jeren High and another gang member, was aiming at the rival Denison Boy gang. Jarman fired from the back of a stolen car but missed his intended targets. Instead, he hit a girl sitting on her mother's lap and another girl inside a home. The first girl was severely injured, losing nearly half of her skull. She now uses a wheelchair and has to wear a special helmet to protect her brain. During the trial, Jarman said he regretted his actions.
From the time in my life when I was lost, I was trying to be something I wasn't. Land, friends, and peers influenced me to do things I wouldn't even know to do. And if I could one, I'll put down the gun and pick up a book.
He apologized for the harm he caused and said he wished he could take back his actions.
And I hurt 2 little girls, so I deserve to be punished. Their family gotta live with the pain forever that I caused. I wish I could rewind, but I can't.
Judge Stuart Friedman recognized Jarman's remorse, but stressed the seriousness of his crimes and the lasting impact. Jarman was sentenced to 41 years in prison. He had a long history of crime, including 8 juvenile cases, 3 of which were serious felonies. In addition to the shooting, he was also sentenced for a robbery in January, where he attacked a 73-year-old man at a train stop and stole from him. James Fairweather was just 15 when he carried out 2 brutal murders in Colchester, Essex, in 2014. His victims were 33-year-old James Atfield and 31-year-old Nahid Al-Mania. He was planning a 3rd murder when he was caught. In March 2014, Fairweather attacked James Atfield in a Colchester park, stabbing him over 100 times while he was drunk and unable to defend himself.
I don't think that there is any clear motive for what has happened to James, and we would appeal to anybody who knows anything about this terrible to come forward and speak to the police.
Just a few days before, Fairweather had been given a referral order for robbing a shopkeeper with a knife. About 3 months later, on June 17th, he took the life of Nahid Al-Mania, a Saudi Arabian student at the University of Essex, by stabbing her in the brain, eyes, and stomach.
Has been in a way that can only be termed a brutal and savage attack. There are some obvious similarities between her and that of James Atfield, who was stabbed to death in Colchester on March 29th.
Fairweather was arrested in May 2015 after a dog walker found him hiding in the bushes with a knife and gloves. He was 17 at the time and said he was influenced by demons and heard voices telling him to take a life.
Some voices were talking to me, you need to make a sacrifice or we're going to come and get you.
He admitted to having violent thoughts, like burning babies and hurting prostitutes. During psychiatric evaluations, he talked about his obsession with serial killers, like Peter Sutcliffe and Ted Bundy. He also liked playing violent video games and watching horror movies. Fairweather was found guilty of 2 murders and sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 27 years. He later appealed, saying his age should be taken into account, but the appeal was denied. On December 28, 2008, 16-year-old Jonathan Belton opened fire and took the life of Oak Park police officer Mason Samborski. Samborski had pulled Belton over for driving without a license and tried to help by taking him to an apartment complex to find someone responsible to take care of him. During their interaction, a struggle broke out and Belton grabbed Samborski's weapon, firing at him in the head. Belton was found guilty of murdering a police officer and first-degree premeditated murder. He was also convicted of using a firearm during the crime and was sentenced to life in prison without parole. During the trial, defense attorney Jeffrey Feger claimed that Samborski accidentally fired at himself while struggling with Belton. However, prosecutors argued that Belton took the officer's weapon and intentionally fired at him. At the sentencing, Samborski's family, including his widow, Sarah Samborski, was present. She directly spoke to Belton, saying he not only took Mason's life, but also caused deep pain to their family.
I hope that one day you regret what you did and realize what you could have done differently. You are alive and your family gets to see you and talk to you. We don't get to see or talk to Mason ever again. We get nothing but pain and wonderment of what our future could have been. Jonathan Belton, you shattered my happiness, my hopes, and my dreams.
Belton remained defiant, claiming he was innocent and telling his family that he would be freed on appeal. In April 2011, 15-year-old Seth Jackson was murdered in Bellevue, Florida, by a group of his peers. His ex-girlfriend, 15-year-old Amber Wright, lured him to a mobile home, where he was ambushed and murdered by several people, including Wright's 18-year-old boyfriend, Michael Bargo. Jackson and Wright had dated for about 3 months before breaking up in March 2011 over cheating accusations from both sides. After their breakup, they publicly insulted each other on social media, with Jackson calling Wright names on Facebook. Wright then started dating Bargo, who became obsessed with Jackson and planned his murder. Bargo, who had a history of theft and carried a weapon, gathered a group that included Wright's 16-year-old stepbrother Kyle Hooper, 20-year-old Justin Soto, and 18-year-old Charlie Ely. On April 17, 2011, Wright tricked Jackson into going to Ely's house, pretending they could settle their issues there. When he arrived, the group ambushed him, beat him, and Bargo fired at him.
After being beaten several times, Seth still managed to run outside where Kyle again made a choice to continue with the plan and bring Seth back inside, knowing he would not live.
After ending Jackson's life, they wrapped his body in a sleeping bag and burned it in a fire pit. The next day, Bargo and Soto got rid of the remains by dumping them in an Ocala rock quarry. They put his body parts into paint buckets, weighed them down with cinder blocks, and sank them in the water. The group was later arrested, and they quickly turned on each other.
This case is the single most cold, calculated, premeditated case of that I have ever seen.
Bargo, who planned the murder and fired the weapon, was sentenced to death, making him the youngest person on Florida's death row.
Jury unanimously find that the defendant, Michael Shane Bargo Jr., should be sentenced to death. Yes.
Right to life in prison. She chose not to speak on her own behalf, refused to look at pictures of Seth Jackson that were put on the screen.
Wright, Hooper, Soto, and Ely were all sentenced to life in prison for Jackson's murder. This incident occurred in a Kansas City courtroom during the sentencing hearing for Michael Gunn and Larry Marshall, who were convicted of their involvement in the murders of Justin Boudreaux and Andrew Ely during a robbery. The hearing, which was expected to be emotional, was briefly disrupted by a physical altercation among members of the defendant's family. The fight broke out moments after the judge entered the courtroom. A woman began yelling, prompting chaos on the defendant's side.
Ladies and gentlemen, hey! Listen, ladies and gentlemen!
The judge attempted to regain control, but court officers had to intervene and remove those involved in the altercation. The fight lasted only about a minute and was reportedly unrelated to the case, stemming instead from internal family disputes. Following the disruption, the judge issued a warning, emphasizing that any further disturbances would result in removal and possible arrest.
Anytime during the hearing, if there is a statement, a remark, anything from anyone on either side, you will be removed from the courtroom, you will be arrested.
Despite the tense start, the hearing proceeded, with the families of the victims expressing their pain and loss. Justin Boudreaux and Andrew Ely lost their lives over a year ago in what was described as a robbery.
We know it will never bring our son back. There's not an amount of years that they could have given to ever make us feel really good about it.
Does this bring any kind of closure?
No. I'll miss my boy forever.
The sentencing of Gunn and Marshall brought little solace to the victims' families, who said no punishment could bring back their loved ones. The grieving parents, while acknowledging the sentences, stated that closure remains elusive and that they will miss their sons forever. On February 2, 2008, 15-year-old Nicholas Wagoner Browning murdered his parents, John and Tamara Browning, along with his younger brothers, Gregory and Benjamin. Nicholas, an honor student and Boy Scout, used his father's weapon against his family while they were asleep. After the incident, he spent the night and most of the next day with friends before acting as if he had just discovered the bodies that evening.
He came back out of the house, told the friends that he found his father inside. 911 was called. Police responded, found the father on the ground floor, his mother in a bedroom upstairs, and his two brothers upstairs, all from wounds.
However, Nicholas later admitted to the murders and led police to the spot where he had thrown the weapon in nearby bushes. In a recorded confession, he explained how he carried out the murders. He said he stood over his first victim, aimed the weapon at his head, and pulled the trigger. When his younger brother Ben started to wake up, Nicholas fired at him twice in the face. He also claimed that he suffered physical and verbal abuse from his father.
Months before the he had told children on the bus, 16-year-old, 15-year-olds, that he was tired of his father telling him what to do, and he was going to kill his father, and he was going to kill his brother so he didn't have to share the inheritance.
A defense psychiatrist claimed Nicholas had a dissociative disorder and was in a trance-like state during the incident, but state psychiatrists found no signs of mental illness. Nicholas also admitted that he took his family's lives because he wanted to escape his father's control and claim the inheritance for himself.
Laura jeopardized. You put money into it. I have a very large, or had to have whatever, inheritance coming to me, regardless if there's insurance money involved there.
He pleaded guilty to 4 counts of first-degree murder and was sentenced to 4 life terms, with 2 to be served consecutively. If he maintains good behavior, he could be eligible for parole in 2031 after serving 23 years. In July 2022, Jeray Robertson was fatally injured in a parking lot at Joy and Franklin in Macomb County, Michigan. The suspect, Jeffrey Clark, allegedly pursued Robertson following an argument that began in Roseville, ultimately firing at him multiple times as he pleaded for his life. During a preliminary hearing on November 2, 2022, surveillance footage of the incident was presented in court, showing Robertson lying on the ground and raising his hand in a plea as Clark stood over him and fired. Upon viewing this distressing footage, Robertson's twin brother, overwhelmed with emotion, leaped from the gallery and attacked the handcuffed Clark, striking him multiple times before being restrained by deputies.
Man, they gonna see you.
You hit him. Man, that's what the police are. He calls on him. I'm sorry. I am sorry. Get over there.
So you gonna make this
Do you need an ambulance or any medical attention?
And I'm gonna need to get you.
Your advice, you want me to call this, but they get one of them.
That's fine.
Both of you being locked up. Yeah, put him in there with myself.
Go ahead.
Put him in there.
Best sit down, old man.
Knock it off.
Best sit down. Sit down. Go.
The courtroom altercation led to the temporary detention of Robertson's brother. It remains unclear whether he faced any formal charges for the incident. Despite the disruption, the preliminary hearing proceeded, and Clark was bound over for trial on murder charges. In 2016, 18-year-old Conrad Schaer was convicted for a series of violent crimes in Osceola County, Florida, dating back to 2013. He pleaded guilty to murdering 17-year-old David Guerrero as he walked to work, and took the life of 22-year-old Eric Rupnerine during a home invasion a few days later. Schaer was also linked to multiple drive-by shootings in Kissimmee over 2 weeks, spreading fear in the community. During his sentencing, he apologized to the victims' families, saying he deeply regretted his actions and knew they were wrong. However, the families responded with anger.
Eric was my grandson. He was my helper to me and my wife. At this time, my family and I had no intention to forgive the guilty because of such a heinous and brutal crime that was done to my grandson, Eric Rupnerine.
One relative even said they wanted Schaer to understand the pain by imagining a weapon to his head. State Attorney Jeff Ashton called Schaer a sociopath and argued that a life sentence was necessary to keep the community safe. On the other hand, Schaefer's lawyer, Francis Ayano, pushed for a 40-year sentence, saying Schaer had shown personal growth and rehabilitation since the crimes. During the trial, Schaefer's mother testified that he was bullied in school because of weight gain and hair loss caused by leukemia. She was also frustrated that despite her requests, the school never provided counseling for him. In the end, Schaer was sentenced to life in prison, but since he was underage at the time of the crimes, he will have a parole hearing after 25 years. Lucy Letby, a 34-year-old nurse from Chester, England, was found guilty of murdering 7 infants and attempting to take the lives of 6 others while working at the Countess of Chester Hospital between 2015 and 2016. Letby had joined the hospital's neonatal unit in 2011. Concerns grew after a sudden rise in infant fatalities and collapses during her time there.
Never in my career seen anything like this. And actually, initially, there was a feeling of thank goodness Lucy was on, because she's really good in a crisis, she's really good at managing these things. But as time progressed, the thoughts started springing into our heads. Could she be doing something deliberate?
Investigators discovered that she caused the baby's passing by giving them too much milk, air, insulin, or fluid. After a 10-month trial, Letby was found guilty of 15 out of 22 charges. She denied all the accusations, insisting she never meant to hurt anyone. However, prosecutors showed evidence from notes found in her home where she referred to herself as a horrible, evil person. She was sentenced to life in prison.
Letby, on each of the 7 offences of murder and the 7 offences of attempted murder, I sentence you to imprisonment for life. Because the seriousness of your offences is exceptionally high, I direct that the early release provisions do not apply.
Lucy Letby's defense argued that her convictions were unjust, challenging the scientific evidence and the reliability of the prosecution's expert witness. They also claimed the judge had given the jury incorrect instructions. Despite these arguments, the Court of Appeal rejected her request to challenge the convictions in May 2023. After a retrial, Letby was found guilty again in July 2024 and received her 15th life sentence. Her motive is still unclear, but experts believe she may have been seeking attention and sympathy, similar to other infamous nurses like Beverly Allett and Charles Cullen. In 2016, 33-year-old Abel Salazar was found lifeless with fatal wounds, his body stuffed in a trash can in South Bexar County, Texas. Derek Rodriguez, who was 23 at the time, was arrested after a brief standoff and charged with Salazar's murder. Recently, Rodriguez accepted a plea deal, pleading no contest in exchange for a 32.5-year prison sentence.
Every day when the trash passes now, and I come and I pull that trash can today, that brown trash can that you put my son in, I'm pulling it out and I'm thinking of my son in there.
During the sentencing, Salazar's mother expressed her anger and grief, stating that while her religion forbids hatred, she remains deeply hurt by the loss of her son.
Every day I'm going to pray for you, and I'm going to pray that the very thing that you did will come and torment you.
In a surprising moment, Salazar's uncle, now a pastor, extended forgiveness to Rodriguez, stating that he forgives him because of his faith.
I love you, brother. I don't understand what happened.
Rodriguez must serve at least half of his sentence, 16 years, before becoming eligible for parole. Salazar's mother vowed to attend and oppose his release at every parole hearing in the future. The events leading up to the sentencing of Craig Ross Jr. were nothing short of a nightmare for the community. It all started when a girl went missing while riding her bike in Moreau Lake State Park. Her disappearance shocked Saratoga County, sparking a frantic search by law enforcement, friends, and family. The breakthrough in the case came when a ransom note was found in the family's mailbox. The note contained the fingerprint of Craig Ross Jr., a 46-year-old man from Saratoga County. This critical piece of evidence led authorities to Ross, who had been holding the girl captive in a camper in the town of Milton. The girl was found on October 2nd, 2 days after she had gone missing, bringing a mixture of relief and horror to those who had been desperately searching for her. Ross was charged with kidnapping and assaulting the girl. In a crowded courtroom, he pled guilty to all charges immediately, avoiding a trial.
How do you plead to count 1, kidnapping in the first degree, a Class A1 felony in violation of Section 135.25 sub 1 of the penal law? Guilty or not guilty?
I'm excited for you to meet the new population of people you'll be staying with for the next 47 years. Keep exercising, build strength, and know every person you will meet in your new living quarters knows exactly what you did. Good luck, and God will not have mercy on you.
Assistant Saratoga County District Attorney Jennifer L. Buckley read a heart-wrenching statement written by the young girl herself.
I used to be the prey, and you were the predator. Now I'm the predator, and you're the prey. I hope you know I hate your guts. You remind me of a stain on a white t-shirt.
The prosecutor shared Ross's statement where he said he had just lost his job and, when he saw the young girl, he decided to kidnap her and ask her parents for ransom money.
It suggests during his interview with probation that his actions were caused by his being fired from work, and he kidnapped the victim to get ransom money to relieve his financial stress. How absurd, insulting to our intelligence, and simply not worthy of belief that claim is.
This statement clearly shows that Ross didn't plan the kidnapping in advance. Instead, he impulsively decided to kidnap and harm her.
He was driving around the park, and this idea popped into his head when he saw the victim riding her bike past him on the Woodward Park Road. If the court were to credit the defendant's assertion that this was not premeditated or unplanned, and his actions are, if even possible, more disturbing because they reveal an impulsive child predator.
The girl's mother, Tricia Sina, also spoke in court, emphasizing her daughter's incredible strength and resilience. She is a survivor, and she works every day to stay a survivor. And I know when she grows up, she'll help other kids become survivors too, said Sina. Her words showed the young girl's bravery and determination to move past the trauma she went through. Before the sentencing, the judge asked Ross if he had anything to say to the victim's family. As the sentencing began, the tension in the courtroom was thick. Judge James Murphy spoke directly to Craig Ross Jr., his words breaking the silence.
Mr. Ross, even when given the opportunity today, in the safety of the courtroom, if you would simply apologize or show some remorse in this record, with the family present, and the defiance to do so, speaks volumes about the person.
The judge then sentenced Ross to 47 years to life in prison for the kidnapping and assault of the girl. The courtroom, filled with family, friends, and concerned citizens, filled with a mix of relief and sadness as the sentence was announced. Ross and his lawyers chose not to speak, and the room fell into heavy silence. Outside the courtroom, Saratoga County District Attorney Karen Hegan spoke to the media and the crowd. She thanked the many law enforcement officers and volunteers who worked hard to bring the girl to safety and hold Ross accountable. As the work of my office is to seek justice for the victim and for the community, I believe that's what has happened today with the sentence Judge Murphy gave, said Hegan. Her words struck a chord with the crowd as they reflected the closure the community and the victim's family had been hoping for. Jake Patterson, a 21-year-old from Wisconsin, saw 13-year-old Jamie Kloss at a bus stop while he was heading to a short-term job at a cheese factory. This ordinary meeting quickly turned into a nightmare. Patterson's interest in Jamie increased, leading him to carefully plan her kidnapping.
Driving, I believe it was either to or home from work, saw a school bus, saw her, and had made the decision at that point that he was going to take her.
And he watched her go from the school bus into her home.
I don't think that's specifically stated in the criminal complaint, but that's where he observed.
In October 2018, Patterson decided to kidnap Jamie. He armed himself with his father's weapon and took extreme precautions to avoid leaving any forensic evidence behind. He shaved his face and head to ensure that no hair or skin cells would be left at the scene. His disturbing plan was now set in motion.
He shaved his face, all of his head hair, and showered before leaving for the Kloss home, so no DNA or fingerprints could be located. The fact that he turned his engine off, headlights off to conceal his arrival at the Kloss home. The fact that he had made a decision that he was going to shoot anyone inside that home, including children.
Patterson made several attempts to kidnap Jamie. He drove to the Kloss house twice that month, but was scared off by cars in the driveway or seeing lights and people inside. Despite this, he was determined and didn't give up. On his third attempt, in the early hours of October 15th, Patterson finally acted. Jamie was awakened by her dog's barking and immediately alerted her father, James Kloss. Unaware of the danger outside, James went to the front door, where Patterson opened fire, taking his life. Meanwhile, Denise Kloss, Jamie's mother, called 911 but couldn't speak to the dispatcher. She and Jamie hid in a bathroom, with Denise trying to protect her daughter in a bear hug. Patterson, armed and dangerous, broke into the bathroom, bound Jamie's hands and ankles with tape, and covered her mouth to silence her. He then opened fire on Denise, forcing Jamie to witness the brutal murder of her mother. With Jamie bound and terrified, Patterson dragged her from the bloody crime scene and put her in the trunk of his car. He drove off into the night, triggering a massive search for the missing girl. The small town of Barron, with only 3,400 residents, was thrown into chaos as authorities and volunteers searched the countryside for Jamie. Patterson took her to his remote cabin in Gordon, 65 miles north of Barron, where the cabin, surrounded by dense forests, became Jamie's prison for 88 days.
He indicated that if he had been stopped by police, it was likely he was going to at police officers with the 3 shells that he had remaining. Kept the shell inside of his house for 2 weeks in case the police...
Jamie Kloss's 88-day captivity in Jake Patterson's remote cabin was a terrifying and brutal experience. Patterson took extreme measures to ensure that Jamie remained hidden and submissive. He made her hide under his twin-sized bed in his bedroom whenever he had visitors, including his father. To prevent her from escaping, he stacked totes and laundry bins around the bed and placed weights on top, creating a makeshift prison where Patterson could easily notice if she tried to move. Life under Patterson's control was filled with fear and uncertainty. Sometimes Jamie was forced to stay under the bed for as long as 12 hours without food, water, or access to the bathroom. Patterson used intimidation and violence to keep her in line, even striking her hard on the back once. He would yell and hit the walls to scare her, especially when he noticed she tried to get out from under the bed. Despite the constant fear and harsh conditions, Jamie never lost hope. For 3 months, law enforcement and volunteers across northern Wisconsin worked tirelessly to find her, following thousands of tips. Finally, on January 10, 2019, Jamie got her chance to escape. Patterson told her he was leaving for a few hours to apply for a warehouse job in Superior. As soon as he left, Jamie seized the opportunity. She pushed the weights and bins away, crawled out from under the bed, and unlocked the front door. Barefoot in Patterson's sneakers and wearing only pajamas, Jamie stepped out into the snowy property. Her escape was nothing short of miraculous. She soon encountered a woman walking her dog, who immediately recognized Jamie from news reports.
He was walking towards me, crying, saying, "You gotta help me, you gotta help me."
The woman took Jamie to the nearest home, where they called 911, setting off a chain of events that led to Patterson's arrest and Jamie's rescue. Patterson returned to the area shortly after Jamie's escape and was quickly arrested by authorities. During his interview with investigators, he confessed in detail to the kidnapping and murders, expressing remorse for his actions and stating that he would do anything to take back what he had done. Patterson's calculated plan to kidnap Jamie resulted in the brutal murders of her parents, James and Denise Kloss, on October 15, 2018. For 88 agonizing days, Jamie endured unimaginable conditions in Patterson's remote cabin, hidden under a bed, living in constant fear and intimidation. Her miraculous escape on January 10, 2019 brought relief and joy to her hometown of Barron, Wisconsin. Patterson was arrested soon after her escape and pled guilty to all charges against him.
2 charges as follows. On or about Monday, October 15, 2018, in Barron County, Wisconsin, you did cause the death of Denise J. Kloss with intent to kill that person, and upon conviction shall be sentenced to imprisonment for life. How do you plead to that charge?
Patterson's arrest and subsequent life sentence without parole guarantee that he will never harm anyone again. A jury found 19-year-old Jonathan Perales from San Antonio guilty of first-degree murder in a home invasion case. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the demise of 51-year-old homeowner Michael Clayton Robinson. The jury took just under 3 hours to reach their verdict. Robinson lost his life after confronting Perales inside his home in Universal City. Both men were armed and fired 2 bullets each.
He's right at me and to my, I guess one to my chest and one to my arm. And by that time I was, I guess by the garage door. And I said, I'm going. I guess I fired 2 back.
Perales testified in court and admitted to harming Robinson, but claimed that Robinson acted first. He said he didn't intend to hurt anyone, explaining that he was high on Xanax and just looking for things to steal. Perales stated that he had already been inside the house twice, loading items into his car outside when the family realized there was an intruder. Robinson's wife told him someone had broken into their home, and he grabbed his Glock and yelled for the intruder to leave. Perales testified that he yelled back that he was leaving and was trying to find his way out of the dark house. When he accidentally opened the Robinsons' bedroom door, he heard gunfire and fired back before running away. On the night of October 10, 2017, Michael Robinson took his last breath while protecting his family from a burglar who delivered the fatal attack. The district attorney's office chose not to seek the death penalty, but instead sentenced Perales to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Prosecutors also showed the jury a picture of Perales' tattoo, which featured a weapon and the date of Robinson's demise.
going in to commit a crime at 2 o'clock in the morning and you're carrying a weapon, then you have intent to use that weapon.
Was he stupid in most everything he did? For sure. But he didn't go in there saying, I am going to kill him.
If we allow going to sleep in our own home to become a risk.
They said the tattoo showed that Perales saw the act as something he was proud of. The life sentence verdict caused pain and tears for family and friends. But Robinson's family found the strength to face the man who took their father and brother. Robinson's daughter told Perales after the verdict, "I got married this summer and I had to walk down the aisle without my father by my side." Even though of what he did, Robinson's family forgave Perales in court. Tariq is facing charges for open murder, armed robbery, 4 weapons offenses, and 12 counts of perjury. The block party on July 12, 2015, in the small college town of Ypsilanti started like any other. Just after midnight, police received a 911 call about a violent incident in the area. They found 20-year-old Keandre Duff lying on the pavement with a fatal wound to the back of his head. He was rushed to the hospital, but he didn't survive. The investigation led to 18-year-old Tariq Jackson, a member of a rival gang, who was arrested and charged with murder. A month before the trial, Tariq pleaded guilty to all charges, including second-degree murder. In a courtroom full of emotion, Keandre's mother tearfully recalled the moment she was told her son had lost his life.
Our whole world was turned upside down from that point. And the reason why I'm sharing this is because that when our children make these decisions out here, they don't understand how it affects everybody.
She spoke directly to Tariq, telling him that she had forgiven him and prayed for his mother.
Mom, where's Mom? Is Mom in here? Is Tariq's mother in here? Mom, come here. If it's okay with you, I'll go Judge Gail.
This is the time for you to speak to me.
Okay. Well, I just want to say,
I appreciate the gesture.
I'll speak to you, but I'll speak to Mom as well to let Mom know. Your son is still going to be a great man. All he has to do is give it to the Lord.
The two women hugged after the statement. When it was his turn to speak, Tariq sincerely apologized to Keandre's family and took responsibility for what he had done. He also gave some advice to other gang members.
Around my age and other people that I be with, you know, the life that we was living, being in gangs and all that other stuff, it ain't worth 16 years. Because eventually you be put in a situation and there's severe consequences that come.
The judge sentenced Tariq Jackson to 40 years in prison. This name is forever linked to one of the worst moments in American history. Before September 11th, there was the Oklahoma City bombing, a tragedy that shook the country. On April 19, 1995, a massive truck bomb exploded outside the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building, ending the lives of 168 people, including 19 children. At the time, it was the most catastrophic act of domestic terrorism in U.S. history. Timothy McVeigh, the man who set off the bomb, was later executed, but his partner, Terry Nichols, is serving life in prison with no chance of release. Nichols didn't seem like someone who would end up in prison. He grew up on a farm in Michigan, just an ordinary kid from a small town. After high school, he tried college but dropped out after one semester. He then joined the Army, but his time there was unremarkable. Still, something about his military service seemed to fuel his resentment toward the government. When the Waco siege happened in 1993, a fatal standoff between federal agents and the Branch Davidians, Nichols was outraged. To him, it was proof that the government had too much control. Around that time, he met Timothy McVeigh, who shared the same anti-government anger. The two became friends, bonded by their resentment, and started planning something horrific. For months, they prepared for the Oklahoma City bombing. Nichols handled logistics. He bought large amounts of ammonium nitrate fertilizer to make the bomb and helped steal explosives to fund their plan. They even robbed a gun dealer. They were fully committed. On April 19th, McVeigh drove a rented truck loaded with explosives to the federal building and set it off. The blast was enormous, leveling the building and claiming the lives of 168 people. It was unlike anything the country had ever seen. Nichols wasn't there when it happened, but his role in planning it was undeniable. Authorities arrested him just 2 days later. In court, the evidence against him was overwhelming. Receipts for bomb materials, witness testimonies, and his close ties to McVeigh. In his federal trial, he was found guilty of conspiracy to use a weapon of mass destruction and involuntary involuntary manslaughter for the federal agents who passed away. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole, but that wasn't the end. The state of Oklahoma also charged him with 161 counts of first-degree murder, one for each bombing victim. Even though the jury couldn't agree on the death penalty, Nichols still received 161 consecutive life sentences. That means he will never be released, ever. Now, Nichols is locked up in ADX Florence, a supermax prison in Colorado. He spends 23 hours a day in his cell, left alone with nothing but his thoughts. Jeren Church was found guilty of opening fire and attempting to take the life of Cleveland police detective Mark Barichuk in March 2023. At 17 years old, Church was driving a stolen Kia with two other unknown passengers near East 30th Street and Cedar Avenue in Cleveland on March 14, 2023, when a police detective noticed the stolen car and tried to stop it. Church fled, eventually crashing into a brick pillar before running away on foot. Detective Barichuk pursued Church and tried to stop him, but as the detective exited his vehicle, Church fired at him 4 times, hitting him in the arm and leg before fleeing the scene. The injured detective was rushed to a nearby hospital. Using DNA, video footage, and phone records, investigators connected Church to the crime, leading to his arrest on April 14, 2023. In February 2024, Church pleaded guilty to multiple charges, including attempted aggravated murder, failing to comply with police orders, improperly handling firearms in a vehicle, receiving stolen property, and possessing weapons while legally prohibited. He was sentenced to 20 to 25 years in prison for the attack and attempted murder. During the sentencing, Detective Barichuk spoke about the profound impact the incident had on his life, sharing his fear of dying and leaving his family behind. His testimony emphasized the lasting consequences of Church's actions.
Was this how my life was going to end? Am I ever going to see my wife and my son, who was 3 months old at the time? If it weren't for my coworker's quick action to put a tourniquet on me, I would have bled out, and you, Jerian, would have taken away so much more than a life.
Detective Barichuk's wife, Alexandria, also spoke during the sentencing, sharing the trauma and uncertainty that their family endured because of the shooting.
Jerian's intentions were to kill my husband, all because of a stolen car and a gun. He should have to sit and sulk and think about the decision he made every single day until he is old and gray because he tried to take an innocent life away.
During the sentencing, Church expressed remorse for his actions. He apologized to Detective Barichuk, saying he was sorry for what had happened and hoped that such an incident would never occur again.
I apologize for this happening to you, Mr. Barichuk. I hope this never happened to you again.
Church's attorney urged the judge to consider his young age, difficult background, and an alleged psychotic illness when determining his sentence. However, prosecutors argued that Church fully understood the difference between right and wrong and made a selfish and deliberate choice to fire at Detective Barichuk in an attempt to avoid the consequences of driving a stolen car. On February 10, 2020, Alec Blair, a 22-year-old from Shelby, Ohio, made a tragic choice. He had promised his ex-wife, Gabriel Clevenger, that they would peacefully finalize their divorce, but his jealousy and anger took over. Alec lured her to his home, where he violently ended her life. This shocking act devastated the community, leaving family and friends heartbroken and struggling to understand how it could happen. Blair had been having a hard time moving on from his 8-month marriage with Clevenger. Even though they were separated, couldn't let her go. On the day of the crime, he promised Clevenger they would go to the courthouse to finalize their divorce, offering her some closure, but instead, he led her to the driveway of his home. There, consumed by jealousy and rejection, he attacked her with a knife, stabbing her 14 times. The violence was so intense that the wounds nearly severed her head. After the attack, Blair showed no remorse. He then disposed of her body in a field near a cell tower in Jackson Township and went to work like nothing had happened, continuing his life as if everything was normal. When questioned, he confessed to the crime and led the authorities to her body. The courtroom was filled with tension during Alec Blair's trial. In October 2020, he pleaded guilty to charges of aggravated murder, kidnapping, and tampering with evidence. His chilling confession and lack of remorse were key points in the trial.
I was just kind of talking to her and wanting her to tell me, the truth, just tell me. And she said she was talking at first that I know of, and then basically that's it.
Dr. Robert Stinson, a forensic psychologist, testified about Blair's history of mental health issues and problems with anger management. However, the prosecution focused on the brutality of the crime, describing it as an act of pure rage and jealousy. Blair's written statement revealed his twisted emotions. He said he still loved Clevenger, but admitted that reminders of her drove him crazy. His expressed remorse seemed insincere to those who had lost a daughter, sister, and friend. Judge Philnamith sentenced Alec Blair to 45 years to life in prison, saying the decision caused him great pain. Blair would not be eligible for parole until 2064, when he would be 67 years old. The judge acknowledged Blair's youth and remorse, but stressed the severity of the crime. In her victim impact statement, Clevenger's mother, Love Lance, called Blair a monster and shared her deep hatred for him. In April 2017, Joseph McAlpin robbed a car dealership, fatally injuring a couple and their dog. In court, McAlpin decided to represent himself and cross-examine witnesses whose voices were altered for safety reasons.
We know if you're lying, when do we know if you're telling the truth? How can we distinguish that to understand that?
Right now, I'm telling the truth.
How do we know that?
I don't got no reason to lie.
You didn't have no reason to lie in the beginning.
I did. I was scared.
Scared of what?
You.
Why was you scared of me?
And your family.
Why was you scared of my family?
Because if you just did those innocent people like that, you will do somebody else like that.
He even called his family members to testify in his defense.
He had a hard life growing up. He seen a lot of things he shouldn't have seen as a child, but he did.
Standing up here to say, hey, you found me guilty. I didn't mean to do it, please. I still stand firm on my innocence.
For the first time, he showed emotion in court.
Well, that's part of it. What's the difference between power calculation and design to set up a date for a man to be put to...
Before he was sentenced, Councilman Mike Peck had a few words for him.
Day one, this was never about vengeance. It's been about justice. I stood there on that Good Friday night as they carried out Mike and Trina and Axel in body bags. I was there. I saw the pictures from the corner. I saw what this individual did to them, the viciousness of the crime. He is a demonic. It's one thing to rob somebody, but it's another thing to do what he did.
The prosecution also had a few words for him.
Your Honor, pursuant to the Ohio Revised Code, we believe that consecutive sentences are necessary to protect the public from future crime, not only to punish the offender, and that they would not be disproportionate to the seriousness of his conduct and to the danger he poses to the public.
Now, it was time to hear his sentence.
On Thursday of last week, the jury found that the aggravating circumstances outweighed the mitigating factors beyond reasonable doubt, and therefore found the verdict to be appropriate.
Despite being sentenced to death, Joseph maintained his innocence.
My name is Joseph McAlpin, and I was falsely convicted for the that happened in 2017, April 14th, in Cleveland, Ohio, at the Mr. Cars 2 car lot. What you're about to see here is actual proof of my incident, showing that the prosecution withheld evidence from my case that would show that I was away from the crime scene during the time the murders was being committed.
Joseph is currently awaiting his execution in prison. A 66-year-old Hells Angels president is about to face legal consequences for a fatal confrontation that took place over Memorial Day weekend. Richard John DeVries, the president of the Las Vegas chapter of the notorious Hells Angels, has long been a controversial figure. The Hells Angels are known for their outlaw lifestyle and criminal activities, and their reputation is well known. However, the events that unfolded during Memorial Day weekend in 2022 pushed their notoriety to new heights. It all started with a violent confrontation on a suburban Las Vegas freeway. Members of the Hells Angels and their longtime rivals, the Vagos, engaged in a violent confrontation that left 7 people injured. The confrontation was so intense that more than a dozen rounds were discharged, with one bullet even striking a nearby church. The community was left in shock as the details of the incident came to light, with many believing it was a retaliatory act.
The concern is that there's a retaliatory going back and forth between the two jurisdictions and between the two clubs.
Just weeks earlier, on April 23rd, a Hells Angels member named James Vincent Dixon lost his life at a heavy metal concert in San Bernardino, California. Prosecutors claimed the Vagos were responsible for Dixon's passing, and the violent clash over Memorial Day weekend was the Hells Angels' attempt at revenge. Richard DeVries, along with two other Hells Angels recruits, Russell Smith and Stephen Alo, were arrested and charged with multiple counts of attempted murder. They made their first court appearance on June 2nd, 2022, in Henderson Justice Court. The courtroom was filled with tension as the details of the incident were revealed. An anonymous witness provided video evidence showing DeVries, Smith, and Alo all wearing Hells Angels gear, riding up to the Vagos members before bullets were discharged on US 95. This footage was key in linking them to the crime. Despite the strong evidence, DeVries' lawyer, Richard Schanfeld, argued that his client was a military veteran with a clean record and that there was no proof he fired a weapon. However, the court wasn't convinced. DeVries was convicted of multiple counts of attempted murder related to the violent incident on Memorial Day weekend. The courtroom remained tense as the prosecution presented the video evidence, showing DeVries and his associates riding up to the Vagos members before the firing began. The footage clearly connected the Hells Angels to the chaos on US 95. Prosecutors argued that the firing was in retaliation for the murder of James Vincent Dixon, a fellow Hells Angels member, in San Bernardino weeks earlier. DeVries' defense lawyer tried to portray him as a military veteran with a clean history and argued there was no clear evidence he fired a weapon. However, the video evidence and the violent nature of the crime made it hard for the defense to convince the court. After days of intense testimony, the verdict was delivered. Richard DeVries was found guilty of multiple counts of attempted murder.
And I can't predict the future, but I can kind of control it. I am fearful that something is going to happen. And when on the highway that I take every day, in a neighborhood where I live,
The judge delivered a harsh sentence reflecting the seriousness of the crime and its impact on the community. DeVries was sentenced to life in prison. The aftermath of the sentencing was felt strongly within the biker community and beyond. The Hells Angels, known for their code of silence and loyalty, were shaken by the loss of their chapter president. Meanwhile, the Vagos appeared unaffected by the San Bernardino incident, leaving many to question whether true justice had been served. The community, still reeling from the shock of the violent confrontation, hoped the sentencing would bring some closure. The violent clash on a busy freeway had left 7 people injured, including a band member who was performing at the time. The trauma and fear from that day lingered, reminding everyone of the dangerous world of outlaw biker gangs. DeVries' sentencing marked a significant step in the ongoing fight against gang violence, sending a clear message that such brutal acts would not go unpunished. However, for the families of the victims and those injured, the pain and memories of that day would never disappear. Richard DeVries' sentencing has left a lasting impact on the world of biker gang violence. As the president of the Las Vegas chapter of the Hells Angels, his conviction for multiple counts of attempted murder following the violent clashes over Memorial Day weekend shocked both the biker community and the general public. In November 2020, Alfie Phillips passed away in a caravan in Herne Hill, Kent. His mother, 27-year-old Sion Hedges, and her partner, 35-year-old Jack Benham, were charged with his murder. When Alfie passed away, he had 70 visible injuries, including broken bones, and doctors found no medical condition that could explain his injuries. Police arrested Hedges and Benham on November 28, and both denied taking Alfie's life. Hedges admitted to lying to the police about taking drugs the night before Alfie's demise, saying she had bought some substances. During the trial, Hedges explained that she took those substances, drank whiskey, and put Alfie to bed. She claimed she checked on him but didn't notice anything wrong. Hedges said she fell asleep and was later woken by Benham, who was shouting that Alfie was under his leg. Benham told police that he didn't see himself as a stepfather to Alfie, did little for him, and admitted he didn't like the child, calling him a mummy's boy. Hedges and Benham were sentenced to life in prison. Hedges must serve at least 19 years, and Benham at least 23 years.
Sean Hedges, for the Alfie Phillips, I sentence you to imprisonment for life. Taking account of all of the factors that I've set out, the minimum term will be 19 years, minus 313 days to take account of the time spent on remand.
The judge called the attack on Alfie cruel and brutal, and criticized Hedges and Benham for trying to hide what they had done. The judge described Alfie's loss as a great tragedy, noting that the boy was denied the opportunity to live a happy and full life. Both sentences were reduced by 313 days for the time they had already spent in custody. Deantre Flanigan is on trial for the murder of his daughter, Jamesia Flanigan. The case dates back to March 20th, 2023, when prosecutors say Flanigan was angry with his girlfriend, Kirsten Watson, believing she was seeing another man. In response, he went to their daughter's daycare, took Jamesia, then went to Watson's workplace, took her phone, and drove away with the child. Law enforcement tracked Watson's phone, which Flanigan had with him, and found him. He then led them on a police chase, during which Watson was on a FaceTime call with him. As she watched in horror, she pleaded for him to stop hurting their daughter. At one point, she screamed that he was hurting her. The chase ended in a standoff and his arrest. But by the time authorities reached Jamesia, she was taken to a hospital and pronounced deceased. On the first day of the trial, the jury was shown video evidence, including screenshots of the FaceTime call where Watson was begging for her daughter's life. Witnesses included Jamesia's grandmother, law enforcement officers, and a trauma surgeon who examined her at the hospital. Prosecutors expect the trial to last about a week. On April 28, 2023, 25-year-old Jaime Lee Komoroski caused a tragic accident on Folly Beach, South Carolina. She was driving a rented Toyota Camry at 65 miles per hour, well above the 25 miles per hour speed limit, when she briefly hit the brakes and crashed into a golf cart carrying a wedding party. The golf cart, a 6-person model with lights, was legally allowed to drive at night and had a maximum speed of 25 miles per hour. The collision resulted in fatalities, and Komoroski was charged with reckless vehicular homicide and 3 counts of DUI causing death. The crash ended the life of 34-year-old Samantha Miller, a bride who had been married just hours earlier, and her groom, Eric Hutchinson. 2 others in the golf cart were injured. Hutchinson suffered a brain injury and multiple broken bones, while the other 2 passengers were seriously hurt. Komoroski, the driver, was unharmed. She was charged with DUI causing death and injury, along with reckless homicide. Each DUI charge carried a possible prison sentence of 1 to 25 years. Komoroski was ultimately sentenced to 25 years in prison.
That's a felony DUI sentenced to the State Department of Corrections for a period of 25 years.
During the sentencing hearing, Judge Kiana Lillard noticed Komoroski's mother, Donna Kosal, and her boyfriend laughing while the victim's family spoke. Disturbed by their disrespect, the judge ordered them to leave the courtroom.
Clown, and that's what I'm going to call him, a clown, was sitting there smiling and laughing. Yeah, you can go too, because if you don't know how to act, you can go to jail. So leave. Anybody that can sit there and laugh and smirk when somebody take her, she's going in the back.
However, loud shouting from the hallway interrupted the proceedings again. As a result, Judge Lillard had Donna arrested for criminal contempt and sentenced her to 93 days in jail, describing her behavior as disruptive and disrespectful. The next day, Donna tearfully apologized, saying she had been overwhelmed with stress and panic attacks. Believing her remorse was sincere, the judge reduced her sentence to the time she had already served, reminding her of the victim's family's grief and hoping she had learned a lesson. In May 2013, Jamesia Reed, a mother from Macon, Georgia, was arrested and charged with the murder and child cruelty of her son, Jaray Reed. The charges stemmed from an incident where Jaray was found unresponsive and later pronounced dead, with evidence indicating he had suffered severe physical abuse. In January 2016, following a trial, Reed was convicted of malice murder, felony murder, and first-degree cruelty to children. The jury deliberated for about 2 hours before delivering the guilty verdicts. Subsequently, Reed was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for the malice murder charge, along with a concurrent 20-year sentence for the child cruelty conviction.
I saw those pictures. And if I had it in here, I would put them up on these 2 big screens for everybody else to see. And I would make you stand there and look at this. You could either look at someone of them you're sitting in that chair. I'm not saying this. I suspect why you didn't want to come in. I've been in and out of these courtrooms over the past for almost 30 years. That is
he was tortured to death. There's absolutely no doubt in my mind. And I cannot imagine. And I hope that I never have the ability to imagine what he thought that day, the day before that. All of that didn't happen in one time. This was serial torture. He never had a chance. He never had a chance. You took it away. You could have given him to your father. You could have given him to your dad. They seemed like good people to me. I heard them on the telephone. They were raised that was the way, giving him. You tried him on that job. And you told him about the worst way that I'd never seen anybody do. And I understand why your family is up here asking for me to have mercy on you. I understand that. I would probably do the same thing. If it was my job, I'd stand in front of you. I have a job to do as well. And I'm going to show you the same version that you showed that before. And as far as I can say, that was zero. On count one of these, I've been free. I've been due to life in the penitentiary without the possibility of parole. On count three, 20 years of penitentiary, because I'm concurrent with this living count one. Anything else in my
Reed appealed her convictions, challenging the sufficiency of the evidence and the admissibility of certain statements made during the investigation. However, in September 2019, the Supreme Court of Georgia affirmed the trial court's decisions, upholding Reed's convictions and sentences. Babis Anagnostopoulos seemed to have everything: charm, good looks, and a successful career as a helicopter pilot. But on May 11, 2021, his life changed dramatically. His wife, Caroline Crouch, was found lifeless in their Athens home, and Babis first claimed that armed robbers were responsible for her fate. As the investigation went on, his story started to fall apart. Digital evidence and mistakes in his timeline led him to confess. Babis admitted to taking Caroline's life in a fit of anger, shattering the world he had built and leaving behind pain and betrayal. On that day, Caroline Crouch, a British-Greek woman, was found lifeless in their home in Glycanera, Athens. Babis originally claimed that robbers had broken in, harmed the family dog, and took Caroline's life. He even staged the scene to make it look like he had been tied up and gagged by the fake robbers.
Κατάφερες και πήρες τηλέφωνο. Όταν συνειδητοποίησες ότι η γυναίκα σου δεν βρίσκεται σε ζωή. Όταν με έλυσαν οι αστυνομοί. Όταν ήρθαν οι αστυνόμοι μέσα και με έλυσαν και έβγαλαν από το κεφάλι μου τα...
At first, Babis Anagnostopoulos' story seemed believable, but over the next few weeks, investigators noticed major inconsistencies. There was no sign of a break-in, no fingerprints or DNA from the supposed robbers, and suspicious details about his devices raised doubts. As the investigation into Caroline Crouch's demise continued, more contradictions emerged. Digital evidence from the couple's devices didn't match Babis' story. Surveillance footage showed that the timeline he gave, saying robbers came in at 4:30 a.m., was wrong. The memory card from the security camera had been removed hours before. Also, Caroline's biometric watch showed her heart stopped at 4:11 a.m. Data from Babis' phone showed activity during the time he claimed to be tied up and unable to move. Under pressure, Babis eventually confessed. He admitted that the robbery was a lie to cover up the real reason. His troubled marriage filled with arguments. In a fit of anger, Babis ended the life of Caroline. In a dramatic trial, Babis was found guilty of premeditated murder for Caroline's death and animal cruelty for the death of the dog. The jury sentenced him to life in prison for Caroline's murder, plus 10 years for the dog's death and misleading authorities. He was also fined 21,000 euros. Despite his efforts to make people believe his story, the truth came out, leaving a family destroyed and the public shocked. In April 2020, 18-year-old Andrea Camps-Lacayo and her boyfriend, Sergio Bourbon, arranged to sell 3 pairs of Adidas Yeezy sneakers for $935. They met George Walton and Adrian Cosby in Homestead, Florida for the transaction. During the meeting, Cosby approached the couple's vehicle and opened fire, fatally wounding Andrea and injuring Sergio. Both Walton and Cosby were arrested and charged. Walton was convicted in February 2024 and sentenced to life in prison. Cosby's trial concluded in October 2024, where he was found guilty of first-degree murder, attempted first-degree murder, and attempted robbery. During sentencing, Andrea's father addressed Cosby, calling him an animal and stating he belonged in prison for life.
Place animals like you belonged, and that's in prison for the rest of your life.
This prompted an outburst from Cosby, who attempted to lunge at the victim's family but was restrained by court officers.
Count 1, first-degree felony murder. I sentenced Mr. Cosby to a mandatory life sentence.
Following the incident, Miami-Dade Circuit Court Judge Miguel M. de la O sentenced Cosby to 2 life terms for the murder and attempted murder charges, along with a concurrent 25-year sentence for the attempted robbery. On October 29, 2011, Al Culver was fatally injured on Little Short Street in Macon's Fort Hill neighborhood. Deontay "Flame" Kitchens was identified as the perpetrator and subsequently charged with the murder. During the trial, evidence was presented linking Kitchens to the Get Dat Money GDM gang, a criminal organization involved in various illegal activities in the Macon area. On September 30, 2016, after a week-long trial in Bibb County Superior Court, jurors found Kitchens guilty of murder. Judge Howard Sims sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
And I told you that I tried him twice in 1989 in this very room for exactly the same thing. It was a gang in East Macon. It's to the point now that I say it almost every day to somebody. And I'm going to keep saying it until somebody finally listens. But there are 3 ways out of that life. You either walk away and you say, I'm doing it, and I'm not going to be a statistic. Or you get carried away. You either get carried away by the police, or you get carried away by a car. You know, big love. Those are the only options. And in this case, it's particularly egregious because it's case, an innocent guy got shot. Mr. Culver didn't have anything to do with it. He didn't have anything to do with him. He shot the wrong guy. Not only did you shoot the wrong guy, you were after the wrong guy to start with. Like I said, until somebody finally starts listening, I'm going to keep saying it. I understand, I read this letter from Chicago, and that's an all too familiar story. You can't do much about the way you were raised, but you can absolutely do something about the way that you lived. You chose this life, but you could have made another choice.
In his remarks, Judge Sims emphasized that Kitchens had the opportunity to choose a better path in life, one that did not involve gang affiliation. He expressed disappointment in Kitchens' choices, highlighting the negative impact of gang involvement on individuals and the community. The Get Dat Money gang has been associated with various criminal activities in the region. In a related case, Kelvin D. Carswell, identified as a leader of the GDM gang, was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison for orchestrating a methamphetamine distribution network in Middle Georgia. Investigations revealed that Carswell continued to direct gang activities from prison using contraband cell phones, demonstrating the gang's extensive reach and influence. The conviction and sentencing of Deontay Kitchens underscore the serious legal consequences of gang-related violence and the commitment of law enforcement and the judiciary to address and mitigate gang activities in the community. In October 2012, Gail Spencer, a 58-year-old legal secretary in Macon, Georgia, was brutally murdered in her home as part of an elaborate embezzlement scheme orchestrated by her colleague, Tracy Michelle Jones. Jones, along with her 18-year-old boyfriend, Michael Brett Kelly, and accomplices Keith Anthony Dozier and Courtney Nicole Kelly, planned to steal nearly $1.5 million from their employer, Calder Pinkston and Associates, by exploiting Spencer's authorization to make wire transfers. On October 5, 2012, Jones gained entry to Spencer's home under false pretenses, allowing Kelly and Dozier, both masked, to enter and hold Spencer hostage under threat. While Jones returned to the law firm to execute the fraudulent wire transfers, Kelly sexually assaulted and suffocated Spencer, with Dozier acting as a lookout in a nearby room. During his trial in May 2015, Dozier testified that he felt coerced into participating and expressed remorse for his involvement. Despite his defense, he was convicted of malice murder, aggravated assault, false imprisonment, burglary, and theft by taking. The court sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 20 years.
I felt like he was watching my everything to see what I was going to do if I was going to go anytime that I moved, he asked me where I was going, what I was doing, what I was thinking. I didn't know what to make of this because I've never, in the little time that I've known, I've never seen him like this. Like he was possessed or something. Running in the room, the gun, and just waving around. Yes, I did feel hurt. On October 5th, I was out. Yes, I didn't stop Mr. Kelly. Looking back, I
The other conspirators also received significant sentences. Tracy Michelle Jones pleaded guilty to murder and was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. Michael Brett Kelly pleaded guilty to murder and received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Courtney Nicole Kelly pleaded guilty to murder and was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole. Pearl Fernandez and Isaro Aguirre were sentenced for the horrific torture and loss of Gabriel Fernandez, a case that shocked and outraged the community. Aguirre, 37, received the death penalty, while Fernandez, 34, was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Both were convicted for the 2013 murder of Gabriel, who was subjected to unimaginable abuse.
Defendant Pearl Cynthia Fernandez entered a plea to murder in the first degree and further admitted the special circumstance of intentional by torture, pursuant to Penal Code Section 190.2, subsection A18. The defendant having waived all appellate and habeas rights as part of the plea agreement. The court ultimately finding that the defendant's plea and waiver of all of her constitutional and statutory rights were made knowingly, willingly, voluntarily, and intelligently, and further that she understood all of the consequences of her plea. Moreover, the record reflects that the defendant confirmed that she was intellectually capable of entering and understanding her plea agreement. Accordingly, it is the judgment and sentence of this court that the defendant shall be sentenced to a term of life in prison without the possibility of parole for the underlying charge, coupled with the special torture special circumstance allegation under Penal Code Section 190.2, subsection A18. With respect to Mr. Isario Aguirre, I'll ask counsel, do you waive arraignment for judgment and sentencing?
Yes.
Any legal cause where judgment should not be pronounced?
None other than previously addressed.
All right. It is the judgment and sentence of this court that for the crime of first degree committed under the special circumstance that the murder was intentional and involved the infliction of torture, defendant Isario Aguirre shall be put to death within the walls of the California State Prison at San Quentin.
Aguirre was convicted of first-degree murder with the special circumstance of murder involving torture, leading to the jury's recommendation of the death penalty in December. Fernandez pleaded guilty to first-degree murder with the torture allegation in exchange for a life sentence without parole, avoiding a potential death sentence had the case gone to trial. During her sentencing, Fernandez read a letter apologizing for her actions and expressing regret, saying she wished Gabriel was alive and that she had made better choices. She also expressed love for her other children, hoping for their forgiveness. In July 2015, Paul Pelton, a 41-year-old resident of Lorain, Ohio, encountered a tragic car accident involving two teenagers. Instead of offering assistance, Pelton recorded the scene on his cell phone, capturing the victim's dire condition. He went as far as opening one of the car's doors to film more closely, all while making derogatory comments about the injured teens. Subsequently, Pelton attempted to sell the footage to news outlets, actions that drew widespread condemnation. In January 2016, Pelton appeared before Judge Thomas Elwell at Lorain Municipal Court. He pleaded guilty to charges of vehicle trespass and disorderly conduct, both fourth-degree misdemeanors. Judge Elwell sentenced him to the maximum penalty of 30 days in jail and a $250 fine, expressing frustration that he couldn't impose a harsher sentence given the circumstances.
To contribute in any way to the heartache of so many. I've learned a lot from this experience.
Make a gory video, try to sell it on the internet, then try to intimidate the other juvenile to change his story. I mean, totally outrageous behavior. And I wouldn't be doing my job if I just let it go with some type of order of probation. I mean, I feel somewhat dismayed that the maximum sentence I can impose is 30 days in jail, because I think that the actions probably deserve more, but obviously I'm confined to keep my ruling obviously within the confines of the law. In any event, it will be the judgment of law and the sentence of this court that you be sentenced to a fine of $250 and 30 days in jail. That's in case number 2015 CRB 03917.
Pelton's actions sparked outrage on social media and in the broader community. People criticized him for exploiting a tragic situation for personal gain, particularly his attempt to sell the video to news outlets. Lorain Police Department issued a statement condemning Pelton's behavior, emphasizing the importance of helping others during emergencies rather than seeking to profit from their misfortune. In January 2010, 16-year-old Daniel Kovarbasic fatally stabbed 55-year-old Dwayne Hurley in North Ridgeville, Ohio. Kovarbasic alleged that Hurley had been abusing him for over 3 years, following a typical grooming process that began when Kovarbasic was 12. On the day of the incident, Kovarbasic claimed he acted in self-defense after Hurley attempted to initiate sexual contact. In April 2010, Lorain County Common Pleas Judge James Burge found Kovarbasic guilty of voluntary manslaughter and aggravated assault.
Now that Daniel's story didn't change, it varied. It went from self-defense to no defense at all. But I don't find that change in the account is due to his calculating personality or intellect. The psychological report, mental status report that was conducted before this matter was bound over to the adult system indicated that, although not mentally ill, Daniel was very low functioning at the time this offense was committed. I hope that the conclusion is that the low functioning was due to a lack of interest rather than a lack of intellect. Or it will be the judgment of law and sentence of the court that this defendant serve a community control sanction with a term of 5 years, which will expire on August 12, 2015. Before completing this community control sanction, the defendant will receive a high school education and a driver's license. He will be under intensive supervision for a period of 5 years. He will remain incarcerated until admitted to a program of rehabilitation selected by the court.
One of these conditions required that he remain in custody until a suitable juvenile rehabilitation facility could be found. Due to the violent nature of the crime, placement in such a facility proved challenging. Consequently, Kovarbasic spent approximately 16 months in the Lorain County Jail before being released under house arrest in May 2011, pending placement in a treatment program. The case drew significant media attention, highlighting issues of abuse, self-defense, and the complexities of sentencing in cases involving juvenile offenders. Kovarbasic and his family appeared on The Oprah Winfrey Show to discuss the abuse and its aftermath, aiming to raise awareness about the grooming process and the importance of reporting sexual abuse. Mark Relich was responsible for a fatal drunk driving accident in November 2010 in Elyria, Ohio. At the time of the crash, Relich was under the influence of alcohol and drugs. The accident led to the demise of 22-year-old A.J. Vincent, a Cleveland Clinic nurse, and seriously injured 3 other people. Relich was reported to have crossed the center line and crashed head-on into Vincent's vehicle. In 2012, Lorain County Judge Raymond Ewers sentenced Relich to 7 years in prison for aggravated vehicular homicide and vehicular assault. During sentencing, Judge Ewers acknowledged the severe impact of Relich's actions, but explained that the sentence was based on legal guidelines and the circumstances of the case.
I can tell you that in all my time here, these cases, this case is one of the most difficult to decide as to what happens. I can tell you that whenever they're just for procedure-wise, so that the families and the people here understand, whenever there is a plea of guilty or a finding of guilt, what happens is we send probation over to do an investigation. And they investigate everything because they're unbiased. They don't have a stake in this on either side. And I can tell you that investigations, they don't show the whole picture, they show quite a bit. I've heard quite a few times, and I've read several letters talking about lack of remorse, lack of sorrow, and maybe that has been brought forth because then it becomes easier to not forgive, easier to maintain hate, disdain, and to blame for one's loss. But I can tell you, even in looking at the initial time of the accident, the officer on duty who talked to the defendant continued to say, "I effed up. I effed up." The report goes on to say the defendant was extremely distraught and worried about the driver of the Ford Focus. He was very remorseful and stated that the accident was his own fault for driving too fast. And he consented to a blood test and was cooperative. Later on, when the defendant was interviewed by probation, it echoed exactly what the officer said that evening, that the defendant was extremely remorseful. It further went on to state some other things. It shows us the defendant's record, which, you know, it's been talked about by the victims here, but it shows a misdemeanor record. It shows no previous DUIs, all of these things which are to be considered at the time of sentencing. It also goes through and it talks about risk, the recidivism factors, would it occur again? And as part of my sentencing, I have to go by what the law says. And there are, and I do understand that there's also some disdain for the judicial system, but I can tell you when I started practicing, the offenses that were committed here weren't even felonies. So for the victims of the family, I would hope that you would think that the judicial system is moving in the correct direction.
This decision was criticized by the victim's family, who felt the punishment was too lenient given the loss of life and the injuries. A.J. Vincent's demise deeply affected the community. His family and friends remembered him as a kind and hardworking person whose life was tragically cut short by something that could have been prevented. In 2014, Willie Frank Lions Jr., 49, of Macon, Georgia, was involved in a tragic vehicular incident that led to the loss of his infant daughter and her mother. Lions was charged with vehicular homicide and, upon conviction, was sentenced to 4 years in prison. During his sentencing hearing, Lions expressed deep remorse for his actions, acknowledging the irreversible loss and the impact on the victims' families.
I apologize from the bottom of my heart. My intent was never ever to hurt anyone. My second born baby daughter, Kenzie. I'm sorry for this tragic accident. I'm so sorry. I pray that you guys will forgive me. Your Honor, I stand before you humble. I understand that this is the Lord, and I have broken some laws, but it wasn't intentionally, it wasn't purposely. That was my family. I lost a child. I lost my best friend, somebody I had planned on spending the rest of my life with, and I understand how they feel. I truly do. I feel a million times worse because I constantly question myself, what could I have done that day to make a difference? But I stand before you now and I ask you for mercy, and I pray that everybody will be able to move on. For me, this will forever be an open wound. There's nothing I can do to change it.
I wish that I was not here with them, not here. I would ask God why. What is the purpose? What did I do? But I also understand that this is His will and what has to be done. I'm going to continue to give Him the praise. I ask you to be lean. I ask you to be just as you already have. But most of all, I ask that God have mercy on my soul. Because I feel that I'm going to have to pay for this if I'm worthy. Once again, I want to apologize to the family, and I pray all things will be yours. Okay?
The court considered various factors, including Lyons' prior criminal record and the circumstances leading to the fatal incident, before determining the sentence. He was sentenced to 4 years in prison for vehicular homicide. 2012, in Sheffield Village, Ohio, 26-year-old Royce Kowalchik, while impaired, caused a head-on collision that led to the tragic loss of Terry Martin, a Cleveland Clinic nurse. At the time of the accident, Kowalchik was out on bond for a previous drug-related case. In February 2013, Lorain County Court Judge James Maraldi sentenced Kowalchik to 6 years in prison for aggravated vehicular homicide, imposed fines totaling $11,375, and revoked his driver's license for life.
Probably got away with many times without there being any consequences to anyone but himself. And because it happened so many times that maybe he'd be using drugs or partying with somebody, with a friend or by himself, he'd go about his way and never hurt anybody and think, well, nothing bad happened that time, so nothing bad's gonna happen again. That was like playing Russian roulette. And in this case, the chamber was filled on this one day. And this time, when you thought nothing was going to happen to anybody else or didn't care about whether anything was going to happen to anybody else, something did happen to someone else. In any event, this case has tragic proportions beyond all measure. I can say in reviewing it in preparing for today that I read every letter, every email that was sent. There were some that I think probably were done after seeing someone else's email and then kind of signed their name to the same email, but I think they were probably they all came to me heartfelt, the people who felt an emotional tie to the victim.
Mr. Martin, I could never ever begin to understand the scars I've caused to you as a husband. To lose your best friend and your wife, Terry Martin. I couldn't imagine all the pain and suffering I've caused to your whole family. I can only hope for when you think of her, you think of how much of an amazing person she was and all the amazing, joyful experiences you shared with her. All the people she helped save out of her job at the hospital. She was truly a blessing to society. It's important that you think of those times with her, when her name is brought up, rather than how it was brought to an end. I do want you to know that I do take full responsibility for Terry Martin's life, physically and consciously. There isn't a night that passes that I don't pray for your whole family. Terry Martin's life was taken recklessly by me, and she will never be forgotten. I assure you that this tragedy will remain in me always and forever in every aspect. Thank you for letting me speak.
Terry Martin's husband, Olin Martin, a Lorain County narcotics detective, expressed profound disappointment with the 6-year sentence, considering it insufficient for the loss of his wife.
To make a quick phone call, to share a story, ask a question, or merely say that I love you. I've been robbed the holidays, robbed of evenings together, days together on our boat, robbed of sharing that moment when our youngest daughter, Julia, graduates from college, gets married, has a grandchild, or when Miranda has her first child. I've been robbed of that by you. I could go on and on about the changes in my life, physical, mental, and spiritual. But quite simply, the love of my life, best friend, was robbed from me by you, Royce Kowalchik. And I'm now destined to holding on to emotions of days gone by, and sounds, tastes, and days that remind me of all that's been ripped from my life. On March 2nd, I started my day like any other day. Waking to share morning coffee with my wife, Terry. Watch the news together for an hour before we prepared to leave for work. But March 2nd was significantly different for us that day in that we were enjoying our fifth morning in our new home together here. Since Terry had been able to move here from our home in Columbus and had started a new job at the Cleveland Clinic. It was our new adventure and an exciting time for us. Terry and I had been married nearly 10 years. I celebrated my 10th anniversary without my wife.
And my sentence must be proportional to not just the damage, because there are so many people that we see who are killed as a result of criminal activity. This is as tragic as any. In some ways more tragic because the victim was such a wonderful person. Under the law, the issues that I must deal with also include that the facts of this case, Mr. Kowalchik was actually getting treatment before the second, after his first arrest and brought to this court. I have to rely on the facts and not hearsay as some of the information may have gotten out to the public. He wasn't out on probation in this case when he did what he did. He was a drug addict, and he was a selfish drug addict, as drug addicts are. And this is the kind of damage they do. But when I look at the Raylis case, not too long ago, I think the facts in that case were much worse. The result wasn't worse because I'm not trying to measure one life versus another. But I know that in the Raylich case, the defendant was nearly three times over the legal limit, driving at a high rate of speed, leading the police on a chase. That's terrible. You weren't far behind what you were doing. You may not have been as conscious as the actions of Mr. Raylich, and that maybe goes more to the extent of criminal intent. This first case, Mr. Kowalchik, 11 CR 084127, had you not gotten in any further trouble, you would have probably qualified for intervention because you were not a repeater, you were not a violent offender, you were not a repeat felony, or you had not committed a felony in the past. You would have qualified for probation. It's not happening. Again, on consideration of all matters set forth by law that I am required to follow, it's the judgment of law and sentence of the court the defendant be sentenced as follows. On count 1, 5 years at the Lorraine Correctional Institution and a fine of $10,000. Count 2, merged, no sentence. Count 3, 1 year at the Lorraine Correctional Institution. Counts 4 through 8, no sentence. And count 9, there's no sentence on count 9 years after it's been merged as well. All counts in this case are consecutive and concurrent to the sentences in the two previous cases. Upon your release from prison, there will be 3 years of mandatory post-release.
Prior to the sentencing, he initiated a letter-writing campaign, urging the judge to impose the maximum sentence of 13 years, reflecting the community's desire for a harsher penalty. In August 2016, 17-year-old Brianna Nicole Flewitt was recruited by two Cleveland men, Kesan Newell, then 19, and Jeffrey Doss, then 22, to participate in an armed robbery at a Citizens Bank in Northfield Village, Ohio. Surveillance images from the robbery, released shortly thereafter, showed Flewitt and Doss inside the bank. Fearing that Flewitt might expose them after the images became public, Doss instructed Newell to end her life.
Mr. Newell, the 3-year firearm specification in count 1 aggravated murder and count 4 kidnapping do not merge for purposes of sentencing and must be served prior to and consecutive to the underlying offenses. You were convicted of count 1, the aggravated murder of Breonna Fluid. You are hereby sentenced to serve 3 years on the firearm specification to be served prior to and consecutive to the 3-year firearm specification and the kidnapping. The total of 6 years on the firearm specifications will be served prior to and consecutive to a sentence of life with the possibility of parole after 30 years. With regard to the criminal gang specification in count 1, you are sentenced to an additional 3 years to be served consecutive to the underlying count. As to count 4 kidnapping, you are hereby sentenced to 10 years in prison to run consecutive to the sentence in count 1.
On August 19, 2016, Newell lured Fluid from her East Cleveland home, drove her to a vacant lot, and inflicted fatal injuries on her. The case took a significant turn when Newell's mother contacted police after hearing her son boast about the murder. This information was crucial in leading to his arrest.
Count 8, tampering with evidence with the 1-year firearm specification. You are sentenced to 1 year on the firearm specification and 12 months on the tampering to be served concurrent to the sentence already imposed. Count 9, theft with the 1-year firearm specification. You are sentenced to 12 months to be served concurrent to the 1-year firearm specification and concurrent to the sentence already imposed. Finally, as to count 10, having weapons while under disability, you are sentenced to 12 months to be served concurrent to the sentence imposed for an aggregate sentence of life with the possibility of parole after 49 years.
In November 2017, Newell was found guilty of aggravated murder, felonious assault, kidnapping, tampering with evidence, and theft. During his sentencing, he apologized to Fluid's family, but denied involvement in her demise, stating, "I really didn't do this, and one day I hope to be able to prove that."
Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Newell.
I just wanted to state that even though I was found guilty by a jury, I do respect them. I do respect their findings and their verdict. But at the same time, I do want the family to know I send them my deep apologies for what happened to their loved one. And I want to send them my condolences and let them know that I really didn't do this. And one day I hope to be able to prove that.
With regard to any financial sanctions, I have considered your present and future ability to pay and find that you are indigent. There will be no imposition of fines and the court costs are waived. Mr. Newell, you have the right to appeal this matter within 30 days after the filing of the court sentencing entry. If you're unable to pay for an appeal, you are entitled to have a notice of appeal filed without the payment of a filing fee. If you're unable to obtain counsel, counsel will be appointed at no cost to you. Mr. Newell, do you wish for the court to appoint an appellate attorney in this case?
Yes.
The court appoints Attorney Jay Schlackett to represent you on your appeal. You will receive credit for time served in the amount of 458 days. This court is adjourned.
All right.
The judge sentenced Newell to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 49 years. Co-defendant Doss awaited trial on similar charges, including aggravated murder, kidnapping, and robbery. Timica Egleton, a Cleveland woman, has been sentenced to life in prison for the brutal loss of her son, Curtis Lee James Witcher. Egleton will be eligible for parole after serving 31 to 35 years and must register as a violent offender. The sentencing follows her guilty plea to charges of murder, felonious assault, and child endangerment. As part of a plea deal, a more severe charge of aggravated murder was dropped. The tragic case dates back to June 14, 2023, when Curtis was found unconscious in a stroller at a Family Dollar. He was pronounced dead shortly after, with the Cuyahoga County medical examiner ruling the death a homicide caused by blunt force injuries. Witnesses and evidence contradicted Egleton's initial claims, leading to her arrest. During the sentencing, Curtis's grandmother, Jeanette Edinburgh, expressed the family's deep pain and loss, describing Curtis as a blessing and joy to everyone who knew him. His father, Robert Edinburgh, also shared his heartbreak, calling for justice for his son.
Would you like to stand? What would you like to say to me?
Jeren, I feel as a person
a sister, a mother, a daughter. I should have never got him back because I wasn't fit to be a mother. I knew that. I wanted him to stay with the movie family, but I was more pressured into getting him back because of the other family. They wanted him. I always wanted him to stay with them because I knew I wasn't fit. I gave my other kids up because I knew I wasn't fit to be a mother. I don't know how to be a mother. I don't even know who I am. And that's all I can say. And I apologize to everyone that I've heard. That's all I can say.
You know, Timica, I have to always start a sentencing by reminding everyone what is the purposes and principles of what I do here. And that is, it's to punish you, protect the public from future crimes by you and others, using the minimum sanctions that this court determines accomplishes the purpose without imposing an unnecessary burden on court or government resources. I always have to consider the need for incapacitation, deterrence, rehabilitation, and restitution. The sentence I impose should be commensurate with and not demeaning to the seriousness of your conduct, its impact on the victim, and consistent with sentences for similar crimes by similar offenders. The sentence is not based on your race, your ethnicity, your gender, or your religion. Do you understand that?
Yes, sir.
All right. You know, this case causes us to confront an often painful reality, the cycle of neglect that can affect families across generations. Ms. Egleton, you claim to have experienced neglect and abuse throughout your life. Without any stable parental role models, you went on to have 6 children, Curtis being the 4th.
Egleton had previously been deemed mentally incompetent to stand trial, but was later declared fit to face charges following treatment. Prosecutors and family members emphasized the cruelty of the crime, as Egleton had regained custody of Curtis, only to fatally abuse him.
I hear about you not knowing who you are or what you're doing, and that you probably should never have gotten Curtis back. That wasn't what these papers and everything shows, and that's why we're here in this courtroom today. I've not heard one apology for causing Curtis's death. You've shown no self-awareness about what triggered you to inflict such pain on a defenseless child. Without recognizing what you did wrong, you'd repeat your conduct if given a chance. There's statements about mental illness. However, none of those statements excuse your conduct. You may recall recently, there was a sentencing in this court, a man from Parma, his child because he heard voices in his head. He's currently serving a sentence of 30 years to life. Ms. Egleton, your cycle of neglect and abuse stops today. You will not be left alone with your surviving infants again. Your manipulation of the system to get what you want also stops today. As a result of that, on count number 4, the felonious assault count, I'm going to sentence you to 8 years. And as you recall, the rated code sentence on that count, it's 8 plus half which is 8+4. In count number 5, I'm going to sentence you to 8 years. And on count number 3, the murder, I'm going to sentence you to 15 years to life. I'm going to sentence those cases, or those counts, consecutive to each other. I believe consecutive sentences is necessary to protect and punish you. It's not disproportionate. And I find that these crimes were committed while you were pending case in a diversion program for theft, which I'll find you guilty of that offense on case 634420 and impose a 6-month sentence on that case. I also find that the harm in this case was so great or unusual that a single term does not adequately reflect the seriousness of the conduct. And I think that the history of use shows that these consecutive terms are necessary. So, Ms. Egleton, the sentence imposed in this court is going to be 31 years to 35 years to life. And I'm going to tell you that when you get out, the parole board will monitor you for that mandatory period of time. If you fail to report or comply, they can obviously sentence you up to 1/2 of any prison sentences imposed.
Prosecutor Michael O'Malley stated that Egleton deserved to spend the rest of her life in prison for her actions. On June 6, 2023, a terrifying incident took place in San Diego's Ocean Beach neighborhood. 3 young men, aged 19, 20, and 21, became the targets of a brutal attack by members of the infamous Hells Angels biker gang. The victims were chased, insulted with racial slurs, and told they didn't belong in the area. This unprovoked attack occurred on Newport Avenue, a popular location in Ocean Beach. San Diego County District Attorney Summer Stephan revealed that the attack may have been sparked by one of the victims speaking to the girlfriend of a Hells Angels member.
It's possible that the attack was triggered because one of them dared to talk to one of the girlfriends of these members.
What followed was a scene straight out of a nightmare.
This happened in a public street at like 7 p.m. at night.
One victim managed to escape without injury by running away, but the other 2 weren't as lucky. One was punched, kicked, and knocked unconscious, while the third victim, lying on the ground after being beaten by several people, was reportedly stabbed in the chest by Troy Anthony Shoulder, a longtime leader of the Hells Angels.
Many people on the street, on the sidewalk that day, none of them intervened because of the fear and terror that the Hells Angels instill in our community.
After the stabbing, Shoulder was quickly taken away from the crime scene by other gang members to their clubhouse in El Cajon. On September 13th, a grand jury indicted 14 individuals for their roles in the assault. The charges included claims that the attack was carried out in connection with a criminal street gang, with hate crime allegations against 11 of the defendants. The most serious charge, attempted murder, was brought against Shoulder. The grand jury also added 3 more defendants, charging them with being accessories after the fact for helping Shoulder escape. District Attorney Summer Stephan made it clear that San Diego County would not tolerate violence or racism of any kind. She pointed out that the Hells Angels, known for their criminal activities and racist tendencies, have chapters throughout the state, including an active one in San Diego County. The gang's history of racism, especially against African Americans, is well documented. If convicted, Shoulder could face up to 39 years to life in state prison. The grand jury also included hate crime charges against 11 of the defendants, underlining the racial motivation behind the attack, as the victims were subjected to racial slurs and told they didn't belong in the area. In March 2018, Anaya Day Garrett tragically passed away in Euclid, Ohio, due to severe abuse and neglect inflicted by her mother, Sierra Day, and Day's boyfriend, Deontay Lewis. Anaya was found unresponsive with visible injuries, including burn marks and bruises, and was pronounced dead at the hospital. The Cuyahoga County medical examiner determined that she suffered a stroke caused by blunt force trauma to the head and was emaciated and malnourished at the time of her demise. In March 2019, Following a trial, both Day, 24, and Lewis, 27, were convicted on multiple charges, including aggravated murder, felonious assault, permitting child abuse, endangering children, and tampering with evidence. Subsequently, Sierra Day was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, while Deontay Lewis received a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 20 years.
99A and B, State of Ohio versus Sierra Day and Deontay Lewis. Defendants are in court with counsel. Defendant Day with Thomas Shaughnessy. Defendant Lewis with Nicole Longino. Present from the state of Ohio is Anna Faralia, Aquella Jordan, and Sean Kilbane. Ladies and gentlemen, have you reached a verdict in this case?
We have, Your Honor.
If you could give the verdict forms to my bailiff, please. Count one, aggravated murder. We, the jury in this case, being duly and panel sworn, do find the defendant Sierra Day guilty of aggravated murder in violation of Revised Code 2903.01C of the Ohio Revised Code, as charged in count one of the indictment, signed by all 12 jurors. Likewise, count two, murder, guilty, signed by all 12 jurors. The further finding with respect to count two is guilty of felonious assault, permitting child, endangering children as to the offense of violence under the murder B of count two, signed by all 12 jurors. Count three, guilty of felonious assault, signed by all 12 jurors. Count five, endangering children, guilty, signed by all 12 jurors. Further finding that the defendant did cause serious physical harm to Anaya Day, signed by all 12 jurors. Count six, endangering children, guilty, signed by all 12 jurors. Further finding the defendant did cause serious physical harm to Anaya Day, signed by all 12 jurors. Count eight, tampering with evidence, guilty, signed by all 12 jurors. Count seven as well, guilty of endangering children, signed by all 12 jurors. The further finding with respect to count seven, the defendant did cause serious physical harm to Anaya Day. With respect to defendant Lewis, count one, we, the jury in this case, being duly and panel sworn, do find the defendant Deontay Lewis guilty of aggravated murder in violation of 2903.01C of the Ohio Revised Code. Count two, murder B, defendant is guilty, signed by all 12 jurors. With respect to the further finding of the offense of violence, he was guilty of felonious assault, signed by all 12 jurors. The further finding of permitting child abuse was guilty, signed by all 12 jurors. And endangering children is guilty, signed by all 12 jurors. Count three, the defendant is found guilty of felonious assault, signed by all 12 jurors. Count four, permitting child abuse, found guilty, signed by all 12 jurors. Count five, endangering children, found guilty by all 12 jurors. Further finding he did cause serious physical harm under the further finding of endangering children. Count six, guilty, signed by all 12 jurors. The further finding was in the affirmative, signed by all 12 jurors. Count seven, endangering children, found guilty, signed by all 12 jurors. The further finding was in the affirmative. He did cause serious physical harm, signed by all 12 jurors. Finally, count eight, tampering with evidence, found guilty by all 12 jurors. Counsel, Mr. Shaughnessy, do you wish to have the jury polled?
Once it's all verdicts, please.
Sure. Likewise, Ms. Longino, obviously, you want the jury polled. Collectively, ladies and gentlemen, Is this your, juror number one, is this your juror verdict as to both defendants?
Yes.
Juror number two?
Yes.
Juror number three?
Yes.
Juror number four?
Yes.
Juror number five?
Yes.
Juror number six?
Yes.
Juror number seven?
Yes.
Juror number 8?
Yes.
Juror number 9?
Yes.
Juror number 10?
Yes.
Juror number 11?
Yes.
Juror number 12? Okay, the record should reflect that we do have the 2 alternates in the jury box. Obviously, they did not participate nor observe the deliberation process, but we did have them available if their service was needed. I want to thank you for your service in this matter. I will address you separately back in the jury room. All rise. This time, the defendants will be remanded without bond. Sentencing is set for March, is it 20th? March 20th at 12:15.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you.
During the sentencing, Judge Timothy McCormick described Day's actions as callous and emphasized the severe neglect and abuse Anaya endured. Anaya's father, Michael Garrett, who had been fighting for custody prior to her demise, expressed profound grief and called for justice for his daughter. Joseph Zeeler may have evaded justice for years after brutally murdering a girl and her babysitter in 1990, but he was eventually arrested and convicted for the crime. However, no one expected the 60-year-old Zeeler to react so violently in court, even punching his own lawyer because he didn't want to face the consequences of his actions. In May 1990, Jan Cornell asked her friend, 32-year-old Lisa Story, to babysit her daughter, Robin Cornell, while she went out for the night. When Jan returned the next morning, she tragically found both Lisa and Robin lifeless in her Cape Coral apartment. They had been assaulted and suffocated, leading to their passing. For 26 years, the police couldn't find the perpetrator, and the case went cold until 2016, when Joseph Zeeler was arrested for an unrelated assault charge. That's when investigators discovered his DNA matched the cold case murders of Story and Robin. Despite the seriousness of the crime and the first-degree murder charges against him, Zeeler's behavior during his trial was disrespectful and even vulgar.
Did you Robin and Lisa?
Absolutely not.
Do you feel any remorse for the whole situation?
Absolutely not. I have nothing to feel remorseful for.
He never showed any remorse for the murders. The situation reached a peak in June 2023 when Zeeler was about to be sentenced 33 years after the murders. He had been found guilty of murder, and the jury had recommended the death sentence. Before the sentence was given, Zeeler appeared in court with his wrists shackled. The courtroom camera showed him calling over his lawyer, Kevin Shirley, who leaned in to listen, thinking Zeeler would whisper something. Instead, Zeeler suddenly raised his elbow and forcefully hit the side of Shirley's head. Fortunately, 2 bailiffs quickly tackled him and removed him from the courtroom before the situation became even more dangerous. In the end, Joseph Zeeler was sentenced to 2 death sentences, 1 for each of the victims. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you can stay updated with our latest videos.